The wet canvas clung to Clara Weiss's face like a second skin, a dead skin. It was thick, soaked, and stank of horse sweat and something metallic. Blood. With every panicked gasp, the canvas pressed deeper, turning air into mud, turning her mouth into a grave. She tried not to scream. She told herself not to give them the satisfaction, but instinct is a traitor. A muffled cry tore from her throat as cold, gritty water seeped past her lips, into her nostrils. Her body jerked against the rope binding her wrists to the iron hitching post. The crowd gathered in the square of Red Hollow didn't move. They just watched. No one stepped forward. No one spoke a word in her defense. They just watched her drown in the middle of a sun-scorched street. Sheriff Amos Clean stood by the water trough, arms folded, his face carved from stone. Only the slight twitch in his jaw betrayed how much he was enjoying this. The sunlight glinted off the tin star on his vest. It looked less like a badge and more like a tombstone. "Where's the Apache boy, Clara?" he asked. His voice was casual, like he was asking for the time. "Where's the little savage?" She tried to shake her head, but the weight of the waterlogged canvas was too much. Her world was shrinking to the burning in her lungs, and a single, terrifying thought. If I die here, no one will remember why. She'd seen the brand stitched onto the corner of the cloth before they'd forced it over her head. Braddock Cattle Co. The same brand on the cattle, the same brand on the souls of the men who'd come to her cabin 3 nights ago with torches and dogs. They were looking for a child, a boy named Taji. A child no one in this town cared about because his skin wasn't the right color. She'd hidden him in her root cellar, fed him her last potatoes, wrapped the gash on his forehead with one of her father's old handkerchiefs. She'd sung him lullabies in German while the mob pounded on her door, their voices full of hate. Now they called her a kidnapper, a witch, a traitor to her own kind. Her lungs began to spasm. Black spots danced behind her eyes. The world was closing in. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Someone in the crowd jeered, and then a gunshot. One shot, loud, close, cracking through the dead air of the square. The weight on her face vanished. The canvas was gone. Clara gasped, sucking in air so hard it felt like swallowing fire. The world rushed back, a blur of sound and light. People were screaming. Boots were scrambling on the hard-packed dirt. The canvas lay in the mud beside her, ripped clean off her head. Her wrists were still bound tight. She slumped forward, wheezing, her heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird. A hand gripped her shoulder, firm, rough, alive. "You're not dying today," a voice said. The voice was deep, clipped, with an accent she couldn't place. She looked up, her vision blurred with tears and trough water. He stood over her, tall and stark against the bright sky. His skin was the color of sun-baked clay, his black hair braided tight with streaks of ash and a single eagle feather. He wore a faded Union cavalry coat, torn and frayed over beaded buckskin leggings. In one hand he held a rifle, a thin line of smoke still curling from the barrel. The crowd stared at him like he was a ghost that had just ridden in from hell itself. And in a way, he was. Kohana, the Apache phantom of Red Hollow. The man mothers in this town used as a bedtime story to frighten their children into obedience. "Step away from her, Red," Sheriff Clean snarled, his hand already dropping to the revolver at his hip. Kohana's voice was dangerously calm. "You want a war, Sheriff?" Kleine's lip curled into a sneer. "You and what army?" Kohana didn't even flinch. "You talk too much." And then everything exploded. Gunfire erupted from all sides. It wasn't just Kohana. Horses screamed and reared. Puffs of smoke bloomed from the porch of the general store, from the alley beside the saloon. The crowd of spectators scattered, their cruel curiosity turning to blind panic. Clara felt strong arms wrap around her waist. She was lifted from her knees, her legs trailing uselessly behind her, the ropes still biting deep into her wrists. She heard Kohana bark a command in Apache, a sharp guttural sound. A bullet slammed into the hitching post right where her head had been, spraying splinters into her hair. He dragged her into the narrow alley beside the barber shop, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. With a single, fluid motion, he drew a knife that seemed to hum in the air and sliced through her bindings. The rope fell away. Clara collapsed onto the dirt, her hands throbbing, her skin raw and screaming. I didn't tell them anything, she croaked, coughing up gritty water. I know, he said, his eyes already scanning the alley behind them. Can you run? Her voice broke. Her entire body was a symphony of pain and trembling. He looked her dead in the eye, his gaze so intense it seemed to hold her up. If you can breathe, you can run. Now! Move! They tore through the back alleys of Red Hollow, a desperate, stumbling flight. Her boots slipped on loose gravel and patches of something dark and wet she refused to name. The sky was burning orange over the mesa tops, and the dust of the chase clung to every cut, every ragged breath. Kohana led her behind the old freight station, toward the southern ridge where the town's jagged edges bled into the open desert. By the time they reached the lip of a deep arroyo, Clara's legs finally gave out. She dropped behind a thorny cactus, her hands shaking so badly she could barely clench them into fists. Kohana crouched beside her, his rifle resting on his knee, his eyes never leaving the trail below. He watched it like a hawk, scanning for mice. You should have let them kill me, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. It would have been easier. You fed my nephew, he said, not looking at her. That's more than anyone in this town has ever done for one of my people. She wiped her mouth on the back of her hand, tasting iron. How do you know about Taji? I've been tracking him since the raid on his camp. Then I heard the whispers in town. About you. He finally glanced at her, his expression grim. And now I've got 2 people to save instead of 1. A hysterical laugh bubbled in her throat, but it came out as a sob. She curled into herself and whispered a prayer in German, a half-remembered verse from her childhood, something her father used to say after a storm had passed. A gust of wind howled through the canyon, flinging sand that stung her raw skin. Kohana stood up, a silhouette against the dying light. They'll come, he said. Braddock won't stop. Not with what your father found. Clara blinked, her mind struggling to keep up. What do you know about my father? He finally looked down at her, really looked at her. And in his eyes she saw a terrible certainty. Enough to know he didn't fall from that ridge by accident. Her stomach plunged. The world seemed to tilt, the solid ground beneath her turning to sand. He held out his hand to her. It wasn't a gentle or a kind gesture. It was just steady, a rock in the middle of a flood. You said you can't run, he said. Fine, then walk. She took his hand. His grip was strong, calloused, real. They disappeared into the shadows of the arroyo, the town of Red Hollow, a distant, angry glow behind them. It was behind them, but it wasn't far enough, not nearly far enough. The sun dipped lower behind the craggy teeth of the southern ridge. Clara followed Kohana down a dry wash scarred by centuries of forgotten floods. Her legs screamed with every step. Her wrists throbbed with a dull, insistent fire. But she kept moving. She moved because he moved. She moved because stopping meant they would find her. He walked with a long, ground-eating stride, never seeming to tire. Every so often he'd glance back, not to see if she was keeping up, but to read the look in her eyes, to see if the fight had gone out of them yet. After an hour that felt like a lifetime, the arroyo deepened. The rock walls rose high on either side, casting long, cool shadows. When they reached a sharp bend shielded by a thicket of thorn brush, Kohana finally stopped. We rest here, he said. 5 minutes. Clara didn't need to be told twice. She collapsed against the rock wall. sliding down until she was sitting in the dust. She winced as her torn wrist brushed against the rough sandstone. Kohana knelt by a mesquite bush. From a pouch on his belt, he produced a wad of greenish paste wrapped in rawhide. Without a word, he reached for her arm. She flinched away, a lifetime of caution screaming at her. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice even. "This will help." She hesitated, then slowly, reluctantly, held out her arm. He smeared the cool, pungent balm over the raw flesh. His hands were steady, practiced. He worked with a gentle efficiency that surprised her. She bit her lip against the sting, but didn't make a sound. "You said Taji is your nephew," she said, her voice a rough whisper. "He is." She watched the wind tease the feather in his braids. "I didn't take him. I found him. He was bleeding. They were chasing him like an animal." "I know," her head snapped up. "You know?" He nodded. "Taji is a smart boy. He wouldn't run to just anyone for help." Clara's throat tightened. "I hid him under my house. I gave him what little food I had. I bandaged his head." Her voice caught. "He reminded me of my father." Kohana looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. Surprise? "My papa was from the old country," she explained, needing to fill the silence. "He didn't believe in much, but he believed that water was life. He always used to say, 'The one who controls the water controls the future.'" Kohana's expression hardened. He wasn't wrong. Clara leaned her head back against the rock, exhaustion pulling at her like a physical weight. "He was a land surveyor, knew these hills better than anyone. 2 years ago, they said he fell from a ridge while he was mapping." She swallowed hard. "But his horse came back without a scratch on it. His saddle was fine. I found dried blood on the stirrups." Kohana's jaw clenched. "He didn't fall." Clara sat up straight, her own pain forgotten. "You said that before. What do you know?" He looked out toward the fading sky, his gaze distant. "Silas Braddock doesn't just own cattle. He owns the sheriff. He owns the land office. He owns every man in that town who's thirsty. Your father was planning to file a federal claim on a new water source. I heard the talk from a clerk at the county recorder's office. A week later, your father was dead." Her voice trembled. "You think he was murdered? For a land claim?" "I don't think," Kohana said, his voice flat and cold. "I know." She couldn't breathe. The air in her lungs had turned to stone. "What was he trying to claim?" Kohana picked up a handful of red dust and let it sift through his fingers. "There's water under this basin. Deep, cold water. An aquifer big enough to feed every ranch and village from here to the Alamo. But it's on federal land, and federal land can't be touched unless someone files a new verified survey." Clara's mind was reeling, a kaleidoscope of fragmented memories. Her father bent over his maps at night, his hushed, excited voice. "This will change everything, Clara. Everything." "It would have," Kohana said, his voice pulling her back to the present. "And Braddock couldn't let that happen. He's been bleeding this land dry for years, controlling who gets water and who watches their crops turn to dust. With your father gone, he thought no one else knew where that water runs." She looked up at him, a dawning realization in her eyes. "But I remember. He showed me the maps. I helped him mark the landmarks. I know what he was working on." Kohana's dark eyes locked onto hers. "Then you're worth more to him dead than alive." The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken fears. The desert grew darker. The air grew colder. "Why are you helping me?" Clara finally asked, the question hanging in the still air. He didn't answer right away. He crouched by the ground, gathering a few dry twigs. "Because you saved my blood," he said at last, "and because I know what men like Braddock do to people like you when they think no one is watching." He struck a spark from flint and steel, A small fire jumped to life, its light dancing on their faces, pushing back the encroaching darkness. "Taji," she whispered, "do you think he's still alive?" "If Braddock needs leverage to get what he wants from you," Kohana said, "he's keeping the boy close, but his patience is thin." Clara took a shaky breath. "Then we need to move. Before sunrise." "No, we need a plan. We can't ride into that town with guns blazing. We need allies. We need proof." A flicker of hope ignited in Clara's chest. "I know someone," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "My father's old friend, Ruben Montoya. He's a veteran. He has a ranch near the old Spanish mission. If anyone in this valley would believe me, it's him." "Then we go there at first light." She nodded, then hesitated. "Kohana, why now? You've been tracking Taji for weeks. Why show yourself now?" His expression shifted, becoming harder, heavier. "Because for 3 months I was tracking ghosts and rumors, not realizing the truth was right under my nose. I thought Taji was already dead." A beat of silence. "And because I saw what they did to you today, and I saw what they'll do to him if we don't stop it." A sharp gust of wind howled through the canyon, scattering the fire's smoke. He looked out into the night again, as if listening for something only he could hear. "So where do we go from here?" Clara asked. Kohana turned back to her, his voice like stone. "If your father found water under this desert, then Silas Braddock buried more than just a man." And in the quiet that followed, the wind carried a new sound. The distant faint drumming of horses' hooves. Far off, but growing closer. They weren't safe yet, and dawn was a long, long way off. The old adobe walls of Ruben Montoya's ranch house seemed to rise out of the dust, catching the first gray light of morning. The wind whispered through the mesquite trees, carrying the scent of horses and gun oil. Clara stood at the edge of the clearing, her throat tight. Kohana waited beside her, perfectly still, his eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing moved. "He won't turn us in," Clara said, more to convince herself than him. "He served with my father, saved his life once." Kohana gave a short nod, then stepped back into the brush, melting into the shadows. "You go alone," he said. "If he trusts you, he'll help. If not, you'll know." Clara squared her shoulders and walked to the door. She knocked 3 times, then a 4th, sharp and insistent. A bolt slid back. The door creaked open a hand's width. The first thing she saw was the muzzle of a shotgun, then a weathered face, dark eyes squinting from a nest of graying hair. "Clara!" Ruben Montoya's voice was like gravel. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph! What in God's name happened to you?" She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I need help, Ruben, the kind that doesn't come with a prayer book." He swung the door open. "Get inside, now." The ranch house was a fortress of memories. A crucifix hung over the stone fireplace, but a half-loaded rifle rested on the mantel beneath it. He poured her a cup of hot black coffee without asking. His eyes took in her bruised face, her torn dress. "You look like you wrestled with the devil and lost." "They almost killed me in the square yesterday. I heard something about it. Heard the sheriff called you a kidnapper." "He's lying," she said. "It's all Braddock's doing." Ruben's jaw tightened. "That son of a bitch has had this valley by the throat for too long." She leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Ruben, my father didn't fall from that ridge. They murdered him. He found something Braddock wanted to keep buried." "Water," Ruben guessed. Her eyes widened. "How did you know?" He walked to a heavy wooden chest and pulled out a folded sheet of tracing paper. "Your father came to me 2 nights before he died. Said he'd found a spring near the federal boundary line. Said it could change everything." He unfolded the paper. It was a crude map. Then he vanished. "Why didn't you come forward?" Ruben's voice dropped. "Because a week later my barn burned to the ground. 2 of my best hands were shot trying to save the horses. The sheriff called it an accident. No arrests, no questions asked." She swallowed hard. So you stayed quiet. I stayed alive. The front door creaked open. Kahana stepped inside, his rifle held low, his eyes sweeping the room. Reuben flinched, his hand moving toward the gun on the mantel. Friend of yours? He saved my life, Clara said. Reuben gave a slow nod. Apache, he stated, not a question. Chiricahua, Kahana corrected. You got a problem with that? Reuben snorted. I got a problem with cowards, not warriors. They stared at each other for a long moment. An unspoken understanding passed between the two men, two survivors of different wars. There's someone else you should talk to, Reuben said finally, gesturing to a back room. She saw what happened the night the boy disappeared. A young woman stood by the window in the back room. Her name was Ruthie Delgado. She was maybe 20, but her eyes held the weight of a much older soul. Senora Weiss, she said, her voice trembling, I thought they'd killed you. Almost, Clara replied, but not yet. You're looking for the boy, Ruthie said. The one you hid. Clara nodded. You saw him? I was in the kitchen when he came to the back door, covered in blood, shaking. I heard the sheriff and his men outside shouting. They were throwing rocks at the house. I helped him into the root cellar. Clara stepped closer. Did you write it down, Ruthie? In your diary? Ruthie hesitated, then nodded. She pulled a small leather-bound journal from beneath a loose floorboard. Clara flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the neat Spanish script. She found the entry. Taji came in bleeding, she read aloud. Sheriff outside, dogs barking. Miss Clara told me not to be afraid. She sang to him. Will you testify? Kahana asked the girl. Ruthie went pale. If they find out I helped. They already suspect, Reuben said grimly. But you won't be alone this time. Kahana turned to Clara. We have a witness. We have a motive. Your father's notes. It's enough to go to the doctor. Clara's stomach twisted. Dr. Llewellyn, he was a friend of my father's, but he signed the death certificate. That makes him either a liar or a coward. Either way, Kahana said, he knows something. He lives east of the arroyo, Clara said, near the old cemetery. Then we go tonight. Reuben began loading shells into his revolver. You'll need more than maps and diaries. Braddock has eyes and ears everywhere. Kahana met his gaze. Then we'll move like ghosts. That night, as they prepared to leave, Clara asked Ruthie why she had helped Taji. He was just a boy, Ruthie said simply. And he was afraid. The words settled in Clara's heart. As they rode out into the darkness, she looked back one last time. Thank you, Ruthie. The girl gave a small, brave smile. Bring him home. The moon rose over Red Hollow, and somewhere beneath it, a child was waiting and a reckoning was on its way. The trail to Red Gorge twisted like a scar across the face of the desert. The sun was high and hot, turning the sand to shimmering glass. He died out here, Clara said, her voice a near whisper. They said it was a fall, but there's no place to fall from, just hard ground and harder stories. Reuben grunted from his saddle. Falls don't leave bruises on a man's neck. I saw your father's body before they buried it. Kahana was already off his horse, kneeling in the dust. Tracks, he muttered. Wagon, heavy. Horses were unshod. They didn't want to be heard. How old? Clara asked. 3, maybe 4 days. Around the same time Taji disappeared, Reuben added. Kahana's gaze lifted to the jagged rock wall that rose above them. There are caves in these rocks. If your father found a water source, he would have started his survey there. We came here once when I was a girl, Clara remembered. He said you could hear the canyon breathe if you stayed quiet. You think he hid something? Reuben asked. I think he knew he was running out of time, she replied. And if I know my father, he left a trail. They climbed the slope, moving from shadow to shadow. Near the base of the cliff, Kahana pointed to a rock shaped like an arrowhead. Behind it, a narrow crevice, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. He showed you this place? Kohana asked. She nodded. Then you go first. The air inside was cool and damp. A match flared to life in Clara's hand, revealing a tunnel that sloped down into darkness. Faint chalk marks clung to the walls. Papa always marked left turns with 2 slashes, she murmured. Right turns with a circle. They followed the signs deeper into the earth. The tunnel opened into a small cavern. In the center stood a stack of crates and a canvas satchel with a faded W stitched into the side. Clara rushed forward and opened it. Inside were rolled-up survey maps, a compass, a leather-bound journal, and a letter. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "Clara," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm already gone. The water is real, deeper than they ever imagined. I marked the spring beneath Mesa de las Estrellas, where we used to watch the stars. The claim must be filed in Santa Fe, but Braddock knows. I believe someone I trusted betrayed me. Don't trust anyone unless they've bled for you. You were always the strong one. Keep going." Tears streamed down her face. Reuben put a hand on her shoulder. "He didn't die for nothing, Nina." Kohana held one of the maps up to the flickering light. "This marks Braddock's grazing land, but here," he pointed to a small X on a hilltop. "This is federal land. If the spring is there, it changes everything." Clara slipped the letter into her dress. "Then we need to get to Dr. Llewellyn. Before they do." A rifle shot cracked through the silence. "Down!" Kohana shouted. A bullet slammed into the rock just above Reuben's head. Kohana rolled to the entrance and fired 2 quick shots into the blinding sunlight. A scream answered him, then another sound, a sizzling, hissing sound. "Dynamite!" Reuben roared. Dust and rock rained down as the explosion shook the cave. "We're pinned!" Reuben yelled. "Only one way out," Kohana said, his eyes narrow slits. The next blast was closer. As the dust swirled, Kohana leaped from cover, his rifle blazing. Reuben followed, his revolver bucking in his hand. Clara ran behind them, clutching the satchel. They fought their way out into the daylight. 2 of Braddock's men lay in the dust. A third was galloping away on horseback. "They'll know we were here," Reuben panted, wiping blood from a cut on his temple. "Let them," Kohana said, his voice cold. "We've got what we came for." "We have the proof," Clara said, looking down at the satchel. "Now we need someone willing to say it matters." As they rode east, toward the lonely house on the ridge, her father's words echoed in her mind. "Don't trust anyone who hasn't bled for you." She looked at Kohana, then at Reuben. They had both bled. But the doctor? He was a different story, and his story was about to come due. Dr. Llewellyn's house stood on the ridge, looking like it was waiting for its own funeral. The paint was peeling, the roses in the garden were dead thorns. "He signed the certificate," Clara said. "Accidental fall." "Sometimes ink is cheaper than the truth," Reuben muttered. Kohana knocked on the door, firm, sharp. After a long silence, the door creaked open. The man who stood there looked 10 years older than Clara remembered. His eyes darted nervously from face to face. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, "not after what happened." "We didn't come for a social call, Doctor," Clara said. "We came for the truth about my father." He let them in. The house smelled of morphine and fear. "I was scared, Clara," he said, his voice trembling. "Braddock came to me. He told me to stay quiet. He threatened my son. And you obeyed?" He looked up, his eyes full of a terrible guilt. "What would you have done?" "I would have fought," Kohana said. Clara placed her father's letter on the table between them. "He trusted you. You were his friend." Llewellyn stared at the handwriting, his body shaking. Reuben dropped the survey maps beside the letter. "We have proof, a motive, and a witness." Llewellyn picked up the papers. This could bring the U.S. Marshals." "Then say it," Clara demanded. "Say what really happened." He finally broke. "Eric didn't fall," he whispered. "He was struck. Back of the head. Braddock's man delivered the body and told me what to sign. Tears streamed down his face. He came to me the week before, showed me his findings, asked for my help getting them notarized. What did you do? Reuben asked. I told him I'd think about it, Llewellyn choked out. And then I told Braddock. Clara stepped back as if he'd struck her. You told him? I didn't know what he'd do. I thought he'd just scare him off. But he didn't, Kohana cut in. And that boy is still missing. The room was silent, except for the doctor's ragged sobs. I have a telegraph line, he said finally. I'll wire the marshal's office in Socorro, but it will take time, and Braddock will know I've turned on him the second that wire is sent. Then we move now, Reuben said. Where? Clara asked. To the boy, Kohana answered. He's leverage. Braddock will keep him close. Reuben's eyes narrowed. Then he's on Braddock's land, in the cellar of the main house. Llewellyn went to a drawer and pulled out a revolver. I can't fight, he said, handing the gun to Clara, but I won't be silent again. She took the gun. Her hand was steady. He saved my life, she said. Now it's my turn to save his. Outside, clouds were gathering. A storm was coming, but the real storm was already here. Night fell over Braddock's southern range, thick and starless. From the ridge above the ranch house, they watched the guards patrol, their cigars glowing like angry red eyes in the dark. 4 on the front porch, Kohana whispered. Probably 2 more inside. Reuben checked his revolver. The bunkhouse is dark. He sent the regular hands away. Wants fewer witnesses. Clara's eyes were fixed on a small barred window at the side of the house. The root cellar, she said. That's where they'll have him. Reuben, Kohana said. Draw them to the stables. Make them think it's a drunk ranch hand. Reuben grinned. I can do drunk and stupid. Kohana looked at Clara. We take the cellar while they're distracted. You go in. You find the boy. No second chances. She gripped her father's pistol. Let's finish this. Reuben's first shot cracked through the night. Shouts erupted from the house. Dogs started barking. Kohana was already moving, a shadow flowing through the darkness. Clara was right behind him. They reached the cellar doors. They were locked. Kohana slid a thin piece of metal from his belt and worked the latch. A soft click, and the door swung open. Clara slipped inside, her lantern cutting a small circle of light in the musty dark. The cellar smelled of damp earth and rot. And then she saw him. Taji. Curled in a corner, his wrist chained to an iron pipe. Taji, she whispered. He looked up, his eyes wide with terror, then recognition. Clara! She ran to him. The chain was thick, bolted tight. Kohana dropped into the cellar behind her. We have 5 minutes, maybe less. He jammed the tip of his knife into the bolt's edge and twisted with all his strength. Metal groaned. The bolt popped free. The moment they stepped out of the cellar, the world exploded in gunfire. Go! Kohana roared, pushing her toward a stone well. A bullet slammed into the dirt at her feet. She grabbed Taji's hand and ran. Kohana dropped behind the well, his rifle answering the guard's fire with deadly precision. We're not going to outrun them, she yelled. Her eyes darted around the yard, searching for an escape. The culvert! My father built a drainage culvert. It runs under the east pasture. He stared at her for a second, then nodded. Go, now. They ran, bullets whistling past their heads. They reached a dry gully and slid down into the darkness. The culvert entrance was hidden behind a tangle of overgrown vines. Clara tore them away and pulled the grate loose. In, she whispered. They crawled through the narrow, cold tunnel, the sound of their own breathing loud in the enclosed space. 10 minutes later, they emerged into a forgotten apple orchard. Reuben was waiting for them. You're alive, he said, relief thick in his voice. Clara knelt beside Taji. We've got you now, she whispered. He looked up at her, his voice small. "They said you were dead." She managed a smile. "Not yet, kiddo." "They'll come after us at first light," Kohana said to Reuben. "We need to ride for Socorro, meet the marshal." Reuben held up a crumpled piece of paper. "Already wired him. He'll meet us at dawn." Clara stood up, brushing the dust from her dress. She looked back at the distant lights of the ranch house. Braddock would come for them. She knew it. He wouldn't come with threats this time. He would come with fire. She squared her shoulders. "Tonight we ran," she said. "Tomorrow we fight." Dawn bled across the horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and rust. As they crested the ridge overlooking the town of Socorro, Clara saw it. The U.S. Marshal's office. A single flag hung limp in the still morning air. But something was wrong. The town was too quiet. "He was supposed to be here," Reuben said, his hand resting on his rifle. Kohana dismounted and pushed open the door to the marshal's office. It was empty. A chair was tipped over. Papers were scattered across the floor. The safe was wide open. Clara's stomach turned to ice. He got to him first. On the floor, half hidden under the desk, was a crumpled telegram. "Marshal McBride intercepted. Message compromised. Braddock warned. Proceed with caution." "Then we make this public," Kohana said, his voice grim. "Right now." They rode into the town square. A crowd was already gathering, and in the center of it all, Silas Braddock stood waiting. He was flanked by Sheriff Clean and a half-dozen hired guns. On a makeshift platform behind him, 3 local ranchers were tied, their mouths gagged, their faces bruised. "Well, I'll be," Braddock said with a smirk as they approached. "The ghost of Red Hollow." "This ends today, Braddock," Clara said, her voice clear and strong. She pulled her father's journal from her satchel. "My name is Clara Weiss. My father was a federal surveyor murdered 2 years ago by that man. He found water under Mesa de las Estrellas, and they killed him for it." A murmur went through the crowd. "You've got no proof," Braddock laughed. "Just the ravings of a madwoman." "I have more than that." Dr. Llewellyn stepped forward from the supply wagon, his face pale, but his voice steady. "I signed the death certificate, and I lied. Eric Weiss was killed by a blow to the head. It wasn't a fall." Braddock's smile vanished. Clara unrolled the map. "This is a federal survey, authenticated. It shows an aquifer under protected land. Braddock tried to destroy it, but we made copies. One is already on its way to Santa Fe." "She's a traitor!" Braddock screamed at the crowd. "She kidnapped that Apache boy." Taji stepped forward, his small voice cutting through the tension. "I was not kidnapped. I was running from them." Kohana placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "She protected him when men with badges tried to make him disappear." The crowd stirred. A man in the front shouted, "I knew Eric Weiss. He wasn't no liar." Another yelled, "You stole my water rights, Braddock." Braddock's men raised their rifles. Sheriff Clean leveled his shotgun at Clara. "You're under arrest for sedition." "You make one more step, Sheriff," Reuben's voice boomed, "and I'll put you down where you stand." The world held its breath. "You want justice?" Clara shouted, stepping between the 2 armed groups. "Then put down your guns. Let the court see the truth. We're not hiding anymore." Kohana looked at Braddock. "It's the end of the line." Braddock's hand twitched toward his coat. Kohana fired. The shot echoed through the square. Braddock crumpled to the ground, a look of stunned surprise on his face. He was dead before he hit the dust. His men froze, then slowly, one by one, they dropped their weapons. Sheriff Clean turned and ran. No one tried to stop him. Later that day, the real marshal finally arrived, too late for the fight, but in time to clean up the mess. The prisoners were freed. The doctor gave his testimony. Clara's name was cleared. That night, she sat with Kohana at the edge of the square, watching the stars appear. "What will you do now?" she asked him. "Take the boy home," he said. "Start there." "Tell him his uncle is a warrior," she said. Kohana's voice was low. "And you tell your story, so they know you were one too." The wind rose, and for the first time, It didn't smell of smoke or fear. It smelled of sage and dust and the promise of rain. Weeks later, Clara stood on the high mesa where she and her father used to watch the stars. Below, a survey crew from Santa Fe was at work, their instruments glinting in the sun. They were mapping the Vice Aquifer, securing it for the people. Reuben joined her. "The trials start in the fall," he said. "Cleany already turned on the rest of them. The whole rotten structure is coming down." "Let it fall," Clara said. "Let something better grow in its place." She sold her father's land back to the town of Red Hollow for $1, with the stipulation that they build a school on it. Then she rode north with Kohana and Taji. When they reached the reservation, she watched as the boy ran into the arms of his family. She stayed on her horse at the edge of the clearing, her heart full. Kohana walked back to her. "You could stay," he offered. She smiled. "No, this is your path. I have to find mine." He held out his hand. She took it. "No one writes about the women like you," he said. "They only write about the men they ride behind." "Then maybe it's time I write the story myself," she replied. And she did. She went to Santa Fe and used her father's legacy not to get rich, but to get heard. She testified at the trials. She wrote letters to newspapers. She told the truth over and over until it couldn't be ignored. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet scratch of a pen on paper, a well being dug, a child sleeping safely in his own bed. But when it finally comes, its echo can change the world. The West was never won by guns alone. It was reclaimed by those brave enough to speak the truth and to stay and see it through. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe.